we've got people entering. All right, it's officially 1 p.m. Mountain Time. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's Biomimicry Fireside Chat. I'm Lexa More, Communications Director at the Biomimicry Institute. Before we get started, I'll go over a few housekeeping items so you know how today's meetup will work. Let's start by seeing who's in the room here. I'm gonna launch a quick poll, and please take a moment to respond. Then when you're done, at the bottom of the screen, you're gonna find that chat box down there. Go ahead and introduce yourselves and share where you're calling in from. Throughout this meetup, please also make sure to send the chat to all panelists and attendees so everyone can see. And if you're tuning in with us live on YouTube, you can also participate in the conversation on Twitter and Instagram using the hashtag BiomimicryChat. All right, a couple more moments here for those that are still voting. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and close this poll so we can keep it going. Wow, the majority here, teachers and educators. I'm not surprised by that. I'll share this with you all. And we've got, quite a good mix here. Go ahead and keep showing in the chat where your, what your role is and where you're calling in from. We captured a lot of your questions from registration, and they actually helped us shape the flow of this conversation. So we're going to try to get to as many questions as we can today, and in the Asking Nature blog post that will follow this event. For those of you that are looking to explore education at the university level, we're going to announce a few webinars next week for October in our newsletter that will go deeper into biomimicry education for this age group, along with one specifically tailored to talk about our Youth Design Challenge program that's happening on September 24th. And you can also now sign up for our next Biomimicry Fireside Chat happening September 17th. That's going to explore the entrepreneurship space and how to bring nature-inspired innovation to market. I'd like to take a moment here to pay respect to Jacob Blake, who was murdered last week. It's beyond evident that we desperately need many levels of systemic change across our society. And we can't greet a new day without acknowledging this. Today, we're addressing an issue focused on education. And as we arrive here in this moment, let's find the hope that we can do something about this for our youth right now. Arriving here in this moment, I'm grateful to be here with you all. Today, we're going to dive into a conversation on youth education. And we have a stellar lineup of panelists eager to talk about the intersection of science, nature, consciousness, and love. Parents and educators are looking for something different, something meaningful for their kids. And in the wake of COVID, we're learning that the technological age of learning is happening now at an accelerated rate. We need actionable and practical steps forward. I have no idea what it's like to be a parent right now, but I hope that this real, genuine conversation among parents and educators is the place to start in getting you the resources you need to greet this moment and ground yourselves in the hope that biomimicry is not only a pathway to creating nature-inspired design, but also a beautiful, connected, and purpose-filled lens for how we live and behave in this world. Bringing us into this much-needed conversation on transforming education and fostering students' reconnection with nature is our special guest panel. Welcome back, biomimicry professional and wildlife TV host, Billy Allman. And greetings to teacher and author of the children's book, Nature Did It First, Karen Ansberry. Here is transformational coach and co-founder of the Exploration Center, Suki Ball. And finally, founder of Pacific Blue Studios and international educator, Daniel Kinzer. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being with us here today.
Oh, mahalo, Lex. Thank you for that introduction. It is so exciting to be here with everyone who's in the room, and especially these three other amazing humans on the panel with us today. So thank you everyone for being here. I want to start by offering aloha. I'm coming to you from Honolulu, Hawaii, and aloha signifies the sharing of breath. and this simple truth about all of life, sharing breath with one another, something that connects us all and can ground us in this moment, even as we face all kinds of challenges and uncertainties. So I also want to give thoughts to those who are dealing with any kind of struggle in this moment. I thank you for coming to this and hope that this conversation can offer us some hope. I want to call into the room a teacher who we lost last week, Sir Ken Robinson, who invited us to think about transformation in education for many, many years. And his focus on the importance of creativity and imagination and the arts, I think, is directly linked to the conversation we'll have today. And he often pointed us to diversity as being a strength in education, allowing all of us to pursue our unique talents and unique gifts in our unique environments. And I think biomimicry and nature offers us very similar lessons. So we'll explore some of that today. I'm really excited for this panel. I'm excited to bring my own experience working in education, international education and education in the United States for sustainability, bringing biomimicry education into classrooms around the world, and allowing young people the opportunity to have a real impact in their communities by looking to nature as their teacher. And I'm really, really excited to learn from those who are joining me on the panel today. So I want to give everyone a chance to get to know who's with us today on this fireside chat. So first, I'd love it if Suki, you could introduce yourself.
Hey everybody, thank you, Daniel. I'm really excited to be here. So my name is Suki Bal, and I am a mom of 3 curious and wild boys, as well as being a clinical counselor and a transformational coach. My other passion and what I've been working on, and I'm a co-founder of, is Exploration Center. It's really a new education framework, a new paradigm for the future of education based on the pillars of nature, love, innovation, and consciousness. I'll love to share a little bit more about that later. I think it's a big part of this conversation. And also since the world has really taken this turn into the digital space, we also have a huge knowledge library of amazing interviews with innovative educators, and really working on getting more digital programming and digital ways of communicating this education and transforming education on a global level. So those are some of my passions, and I'm just really excited to be a part of this conversation because it's been a hard time for a lot of us. And for me, I have this real knowing and trust that there is something really beautiful on the other side. And we're seeing it all the time with the fact that, for a long time, education needed to transform, and something had to break for it to now be able to be rebuilt. And so I think we're at a really beautiful place, and I just want to be able to support parents and educators, as well as really continue opening up this conversation around the transformation of education, particularly connecting us back to ourselves and to nature.
Oh, thank you, Suki. We're so lucky to have you with us today. I'm really excited for this conversation. Billy, can you introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. Billy Allman. I'm hailing from the indigenous lands of the Chumash people, presently known as Burbank, California. I am the #girl dad of 2 amazing young women, a 5-year-old who loves Spider-Man and a 2-month-old who is very deep in thought all the time. And I am a person who got a D in biology and went on to host a wildlife television show for Animal Planet. And I say that because I'm also someone who focuses on, non-traditional ways of making STEM and biomimicry and nature accessible to kids of all ages. And I'm currently focusing on what I'm referring to as astrobiofuturism, which is looking at how life on other planets, the needs for living on other planets, the technology and innovation behind that can also be applied to challenges that we will face in the near future. Very excited to be on this panel, very excited to talk to these amazing individuals and to work with all of you educators and great parents out in the world.
Oh, thanks, Billy. It's always a lot of fun having you in the conversation. Appreciate you being here. And last but certainly not least, Karen, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, everyone. My name's Karen Ansberry, and I'm a teacher from Ohio. So I'm representing the Midwest with this panel. And I have over 25 years of experience in public education as a 5th and 6th grade teacher in the classroom, and also as a curriculum specialist. And I've also taught in some more non-traditional settings like science camps and at the Cincinnati Zoo, which was really cool. And now I spend my time writing a series of books for teachers called Picture Perfect Science Lessons. And I work with science educators all over the country. And my passion is making STEM accessible for all learners through the use of engaging stories and nonfiction, hands-on explorations, and also engineering design challenges. So I feel like I'm a little bit late to the biomimicry party because I didn't really become interested in it until the next generation science standards came out, and there were references to biomimicry design challenges. And I was like, wow, what a cool approach to engineering. I want to learn more about this. So it wasn't until then that I discovered that the practice of biomimicry can be really transformative because it makes you look at biodiversity as this whole huge library of time-tested solutions and to really think differently about the natural world and our place in it. So this inspired me to write a children's book called Nature Did It First, Engineering Through Biomimicry. And I'm really excited to share it with you today, as well as some other ideas for really infusing biomimicry into your curriculum, whether you're a classroom teacher or a homeschooling parent. So I have 4 young children myself. So like all of us here, I know what it's like to homeschool during a pandemic. So I have to give you some really practical tips. And all of the ideas that I share will be found on a Padlet that I can give you access to. So thanks, everybody.
Oh, thank you, Karen. Yeah, thanks for those resources as well. And the book's fantastic. My daughter's already dove into that, and Daddy, it's just like a poem, and really, really loves that book. So thank you, Karen, for being here. We're gonna leap in by diving in further into this moment and exploring together what the current state of education is, what's really changing about education in this moment. Suki talked about, it sort of takes something to be broken in order for us to really get in and start rebuilding it and fixing it. In the Hawaiian landscape, we have a term called Kipuka, and it's borrowed by geologists from the Hawaiians and references a small patch of forest that's left behind after a lava flow. So it's a surviving patch of forest. And within that Kipuka, the seeds of the future life that's going to populate that landscape are there. And others will be carried in on the wind and float across the ocean to get to Hawaii as well. But that concept of Kipuka is really interesting, and ecologically, it's not just volcanoes and lava flows where we see these hidden seeds of life. When you get rainfall in the desert and we see incredible blooms, when we get fires, very destructive fires as we're seeing in California again this year, and we saw in Australia earlier this year. From that, new life is born, and ecosystems are so brilliant that they're able to grow back. And I think our education system, what we can build, the learning ecosystem we can build for our youth is hidden and tucked away in nature and in some of the wisdom that we've been storing for a long time. So I'm excited to kind of dive into some of these thoughts and hear from the panel about what it's like to be a parent, what it's like to be an educator in this moment, and what we can carry forward. What are those seeds, those little hidden seeds that we're carrying forward in this conversation and into the future? So first, Suki, I have a question for you. How can we get inspired during this pandemic period, especially since it's really challenging to get out and go observe nature?
Yeah, what's really interesting for me is how, we're all going through a very diverse range of experiences. There's some parents, people that are in really like high density populations, it is definitely going to be a challenge to get outside. But for the vast majority of us, I think we actually, it's safer to be outside during a pandemic. There's lots of studies that are showing that being outside is definitely the safest place for us to be, where there's a lot less chance of transmission. So again, a beautiful opportunity in a hard time. And so, for me, I think that's a beautiful opportunity in education and in our family parenting as well, and how we actually can really bring nature into kind of our regular routine, our regular life, and spend a lot more time outside. And I mean, as a parent, I live in the Pacific Northwest. I'm in Victoria in Canada, BC, and for us, we deal with rain, and so there's that kind of barrier to get outside as these seasons are changing now. But you know what? This is such a really pragmatic piece of advice. But it's done wonders for my family and for the people I know is really just dressing for the weather. If we can, as parents and educators, just make sure that we have the gear so that our kids are going to feel comfortable being outside for an extended period of time, I think the kids are going to be safer during this pandemic, and we are developing that relationship. I'm a true believer that if we just get our kids outside, they will fall in love with nature. They will be curious. They will realize, kind of the wonder and awe that is nature. They will become stewards of the land and really protect it, because they will fall in love with planet Earth, and they will do everything to protect her, as well as that own regulation that happens within our human bodies when we are out in nature. So I think it's going to be for us adults to just sometimes it's adults that are a little bit more hesitant to go outside, and I think if we just prepare our kids to, and it just becomes a norm, I think we have an opportunity to change even the public school system to be able to have so much more of the learning happen outside in these outdoor classrooms, so long as everyone's dressed appropriately.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Scandinavian saying, and they have such a great relationship with weather and climate, but they say there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothes. So I think, braving the weather really helps kids learn resilience, and they learn to appreciate the uniqueness of each seasons, if you live in a place with seasons. And yeah, it's, as Suki said, it's actually safer from COVID outside.
I think there's also something about there's the idea of going outside, and then there's the idea of connecting to nature, and sometimes those things are the same, and sometimes they can be different. And so I know a lot of places where there's families that live in urban centers. There's not necessarily a lot of giant or parks or a lot of available outdoor spaces, but I like to communicate to people that nature is ever present. It's in our bodies. It's in the the microbes in our stomach. It's in the apple that we get from the grocery store. All of these things that we consume as food, or that we see out of our window, or even the bugs that kind of make us nervous. All of these things are aspects of nature. And there's also the science that's connected to why those things are there and how they've come to be. So when we're talking about connecting to nature, I think it's very important that we also understand that there's so many different aspects to our everyday life that we might not identify as being natural elements that actually are.
Yeah, I love that distinction, because it's like, really for us to be able to have that that capacity to see and expose our children to the nature and the natural world, and nature isn't just in a forest. You're right. It's like it can be in your home. We're nature, and so yeah, I love that.
I want to, Suki, I just want to sort of say that again. We are nature, right? And I love that. And kids know it. I've never seen a kid scold their parents for jumping in a puddle on the sidewalk, right? I've never seen that happen. So, kids, like you said, they want to be connected to nature. They understand that they are connected to nature, right? That hasn't been educated out of them and hasn't been, shaped and molded out of them. And so the more that we can build our education system around deepening and maintaining and nurturing and growing that very ingrained, right? All of us share a DNA that is tied to the rest of life. So I think that's a really cool point, that, if we let kids connect with nature in all its forms. I often think of this in terms of the genius of place, which is a term in biomimicry we use pretty often to describe a collection of organisms that make everything work in an ecosystem and have a bunch of unique adaptations for surviving in that ecosystem. But that genius of place is even bigger than that, and we're part of it. So whether your place is you know, a downtown urban environment or a rural environment, or you're out in the wild. I think all of those places are opportunities that contain a particular genius that young people need the opportunity to further explore. So that's fantastic. I love it. But I really want us to think about the value of biomimicry and STEM education in particular. So bringing sort of nature and tying it to design, tying it to technology, tying it to these creative endeavors. What is the value of that? And is there insight that we can draw from nature, not just things we can teach about, right? Not just a practice that we can teach about, but a way that we can teach, an education ecosystem that we could build that was truly inspired by nature, that was truly ecological in design. And so I want to explore a little bit about that. You know, I'll share just a quick story about what that looks like here in the Hawaiian context. The Hawaiians had a renaissance, a cultural renaissance in the 1970s, largely spurred by the reconstruction of voyaging canoes, the kinds of canoes that brought them here hundreds of years ago. And that cultural renaissance has reconnected and reattached the people of these islands to their places. And so they literally define their communities and their politics and their social structures to the landscape itself, and really to the unique watersheds called ahupua'a here in Hawaii. And so I'm really curious about, you know, since I've been here, how can we really connect our young people to a sense of place, and really allow them to see the unique ecosystems that surround them in a way that the Native Hawaiian community has really taught me since I've been here. I do want to jump over. I want to ask the audience. So all of you out there who are listening, we want to know what some of your challenges are in introducing biomimicry into educational materials. So there's going to be a poll up on the screen. If you can take a moment to give a look at those responses. What are some of the things that are standing in the way of bringing biomimicry into the life of young people in your community? And we also love all the comments in the chat. It's great to see people from all over the world. If you're following in the chat, we have people from, you know, all corners of the globe tuning in today. We really appreciate that, and we really value hearing from you. All right, I think we'll keep the poll up just for a little bit longer for you to read through those responses. And we can see some of the things that stand out there. And I invite anyone else on the panel who sees something that sticks out to them or that they'd like to respond to, feel free. We see the largest is, I don't know how to convince a decision maker to offer it in curriculum. And we know that a lot of our kids are experiencing curriculum that is designed by people far away from them, not in their place, not in their community. And that how do we find those decision makers and start working to sort of shift policy? It's a really interesting question. And we can explore that a little bit further in this conversation. I see another big response, 30% said, I need curriculum or activities that outline how they meet the current standards that we're using in the classroom. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well, because there definitely are a lot of ways. Biomimicry is so interdisciplinary, so transdisciplinary in nature. You can really connect it to all different sorts of curriculum. I know that we can hear from others too. I know that I've not only used it in STEM education, I've used it in language arts and storytelling education. I've used it in social studies education, geography education. So the arts and design, of course. So there's a lot of different ways you can link up to standards across the curriculum, not even just in science. To Suki or Billy or Karen, do you guys have any thoughts on the poll results?
I was just going to say, when it comes to decision maker, I think, we're at a place right now, again, like things are, I think we have an opportunity now to capitalize on the shift that's happening in education, you know, the outdoor safety that is available in outdoor education during the pandemic. And there's so many studies and research that shows how powerful it is for children to be outdoor. There's, you know, there's forest schools, there's 8 Shields, there's a lot of different like, as well as the biomimicry perspective, permaculture, there's so many areas that really highlight that. And I think if we can bring that, you know, that information to the decision makers and give that compelling argument, I think that's how we're going to really transform things. And there's a lot of people right now that are choosing to opt to do home learning or to learning pods and things like that. And that's where you have that opportunity to actually kind of do things a different way and be able to have a little bit more autonomy in how you educate your children. It's not obviously available for everybody, but you know, I think there is enough research out there and that there is enough even current kind of circumstances that really can push us in this direction. I think it's a really pivotal moment. And bringing that to our educators, bringing that to the teacher, bringing that to the principal, and then the principals can take it on to even to go to the superintendents. You know, how are we going to create like the systemic changes really for us to hit it on all the different levels? So I think this is the time, and I really encourage everybody to you know, find support in your community. There are so many people. That's what one incredible thing that I found in recently is that the whole world is like, it's like mycelium, right? It's like everybody is ready for this transformation. And I'm continually surprised and amazed when I speak to somebody in Japan, and I speak to somebody, you know, in Europe, and I speak to somebody in Australia, and it's like everyone's feeling the same things about education, the need for us to honor children for their own uniqueness, us to bring in education as a whole system, for nature to be an integral part of learning and play. It seems as though like everyone's thinking the same thing. So there's something really magical right now, I believe.
And just to piggyback off that a little bit, you know, one of the deep patterns in nature that we talk about with biomimicry is this idea of being locally attuned and responsive. And if my friend Kevin were here, he would talk about making a value proposition to those superintendents or those decision makers. What are the things that they have as their priority? And then you can use biology and biomimicry as a way to make the case for how to get there. Because biomimicry is so interdisciplinary, there, you know, as you said, Daniel, there's so many different touch points of intersection and introduction into biomimicry, whether it is, you know, the poetry that inspires, that's inspired by people sitting underneath a tree, right? You have the laws of physics that were inspired by an apple falling. So there's all of these different touch points. I think the main thing is to just understand what are the true objectives of your leaders, and how can you know, work with us and others connected to the Biomimicry Network to help you make those arguments and illustrate the examples of where biomimicry and nature have inspired different touch points to science, to technology, to design, to, you know, AP English.
Absolutely.
And I can probably jump in here and speak to the public school teachers who are thinking, but the standards. So, you know, 20 states, I think, and have completely adopted the next generation science standards, which came out like maybe 8 years ago. And then there's like 40 more that have education standards that are either aligned to the NGSS or aligned to the framework for K-12 science education. So it's likely that many of your school districts or your children's schools have curricula aligned to some degree with NGSS. And so here's the thing, the word biomimicry doesn't appear in these standards. So what's up with that? Well, the NGSS, they avoid suggesting teaching methods or curriculum, since the goal is to describe what students should be able to do rather than how they should be taught. So the writers of the standards just really made a decision not to include it because they saw it as more of an instructional approach. But I see biomimicry as an awesome instructional approach. So not only is it an approach to science, it's sort of really like, like a way of life. It's a way of looking at the world, and it can help us to learn how to live on our planet without harming it, and teach kids, as you all have been saying, that we are nature, even though we might see ourselves as separate from it. So biomimicry is a great way to teach all of those science and engineering practices that are in the NGS standards. There is a first grade standard, an expectation that asks students to design a solution to a human problem using, by mimicking how plants or animals use their parts. So that is biomimicry, even though the word's not in there. And like you were saying, biomimicry is truly multidisciplinary because it requires collaboration among disciplines like life science, earth space science, physical science, technology, engineering, mathematics. So you can really teach a lot of content through biomimicry in a really engaging and meaningful way. So even though you don't see that word in the standards, you have our permission to teach it.
Love that, Karen. Absolutely. Definitely have the permission of the four of us. And I think for me, it really comes down to a lot of what the other panelists have said. We have to build champions, local champions of biomimicry in schools and outside of schools. And then I love Suki's reference to mycelium networks. If you don't know about how trees communicate with each other across the forest through fungus, through fungi, please go check it out. But this idea of building a network of champions in our schools and raising them up into positions of leadership, right? A key saying within biomimicry is we need biologists at the design table. Well, we need biologists and biomimics at the leadership table within education as well. And so schools need sustainability directors. They need people who are engaging students and faculty. I saw a lot of people in the poll who said, I just would like some more professional development. And we need to empower champions locally attuned, build from the bottom up, another deep pattern we see in nature, right? I want to call these out because of all the panelists, nature is the greatest one. We're just trying to represent her today. And you three are doing a great job. So I love all the insight you guys are sharing. I wonder if Billy, do you have any other insights into specifically biomimicry? What does biomimicry offer us? You talked about being locally attuned and responsive. We see our schools so we can move in that direction and understand what the leaders need. But for our young people, what does the practice of biomimicry really bring to education?
Well, one of the things I love about biomimicry is the fact that in a lot of ways it builds off of and it harkens back to a child's natural curiosity about the world around them. And biomimicry is really rooted in understanding the context of why something has changed over time to become what it is. And so when you start playing with trying to answer each of these questions, you start to see that biomimicry in some ways is this game of discovering how things came to be and why things can be completely different with the same conditions in two different locations, right? So you have all of these, what are called abiotic and biotic factors, these living and non-living factors that have influenced, the form of the beak of one bird versus the form of the beak of another bird. And just the curiosity of answering a child's question of why does this beak look this way? Or why is this bird this color? Or, why does a spider why does a spider have 8 legs? I'm thinking of my daughter now, who I don't know if it was a chicken or the egg with Spider-Man, but she loves spiders and Spider-Man. And so just answering these questions, biomimicry becomes in a lot of ways a game where you can help children become the heroes of their own learning by allowing them to just follow the path of their own curiosity to discover their own passions about different aspects of nature. And so I think in a lot of ways, because it also ties to STEM and to technology, there's also the cultural aspect of biomimicry. You talked about the significance of Kipuka spaces. And one of the things that comes to mind for me is this idea of Sankofa, which comes from the Akan tribe in Ghana. And it's this idea of going back into the past to draw things that you might need for the future. And so when we talk about biomimicry, we're talking about this idea of 3.8 billion years of research and development that has happened in the natural world, that people, scientists and technologists, designers have all tapped into to start rethinking how we're creating the world of today and tomorrow.
Oh, I love that. Thanks, Billy. You know, the kids are that, you know, Billy, your children are pretty young. Your two girls, two young women, are quite young women. And, you know, we see sometimes as students go through their educations, and I see a lot of high school age students and middle school age students, they're now on their computers a lot of the day. They maybe feel like they've lost some desire or connection to the outside world. I'm wondering from Suki and from Karen, your insights into sort of when and why that happens, and how we can respond to it, what we can do in online spaces, virtual spaces, and non-virtual spaces to sort of reignite that connection.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with how the adults around the children are speaking of nature. You know, do we speak about nature with deep reverence? Do we tie the connection between the intelligence that made an acorn turn into an oak tree is the same intelligence that made us go from a cell to a human being, or to a crying baby? And so, you know, I think a lot of how we speak about nature, the connections that we continue to make between ourselves and nature, has a lot to do with it. I think if teachers are bringing that conversation into the classrooms all the time in all of the different subjects. I think if parents are honoring nature and speaking about us being a part of nature, I think that brings that changes the conversation. And really also always being in that awareness that, like, nature is the greatest. I mean, if they're into tech, nature is the greatest form of technology, you know, in the world. And so it's that will ever in the universe that will ever be able to study or understand. And so that connection, I think, and bringing it back in that way. And then as far as the whole tech piece, you know, I think, you know, our children are growing up in an absolutely different age than we did. You know, like, I oftentimes say, like, I don't know if my kids are even going to have to learn how to drive a car. You know, by the time that they're 16 years old, you know, maybe there's going to be autonomous vehicles. Who knows? You know, so that's just a small little piece of that new, different world that they're coming into. And at the same time, what I find really exciting and hopeful is that, like, if they develop that connection with nature, if they, you know, will do everything to protect her, and if they will also, you know, be learning and understanding kind of how biomimicry is our lens into the future and the future of technology, they will be the ones that come up with the technology that's going to save our planet and save maybe human civilization as well. And so if we can kind of create that base of really that deep love and respect and reverence of nature by the way we speak about it, by having them be outside in connecting to it, for them to be able to make those connections all the time of all the different elements of nature that are around them, even when they're inside, you know, and like I personally, I also use nature as like the antidote to over tech, you know? So for us, it's like, okay, there's been lots of screen time today. Like, our kids know that it's like, we will be going out to nature to like decompress and to get back connected to ourselves again. So there's so many ways that we can, you know, be present to what is, and to be in acceptance of what is, and at the same time use nature as kind of this like light to get us through this strange time that we're in that we don't know how to navigate yet.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. There's a study that found the average American kid spends like 5 to 8 hours a day in front of a screen, which you can only imagine is maybe even higher with a lot of kids doing distance learning. So, you know, our goal really needs to be to infuse their daily lives with more time spent in nature, away from their screens, reading about nature and learning from nature, thinking about their place in nature. So just that habit of mind. And you know, we've all heard about like the nature deficit disorder Richard Louv talked about in his awesome book Last Child in the Woods. But I think we can really reverse the effects of the so-called nature deficit disorder by you know, giving kids those really positive physical connections to the natural world. And, you know, as Suki mentioned, by speaking of nature with deep reverence, reminding children that we are nature, and just going out in nature. I mean, it's as simple as that. There's research that shows 20 minutes out of your day to stroll or sit in a place that makes you feel in contact with nature will lower your stress hormones and help you restore focus. So I have a whole bunch of, I call them green breaks. I have tips on the Padlet you can check out, such as ways to find nature in an urban setting, taking listening walks, befriending a tree, doing poetry in nature, and things like that. So just keep in mind that when your kids are taking the green breaks, that you can benefit too. So make sure you go out there with them and it will really help restore your focus.
I just want to add a little bit to that, this touch point about technology and nature. You know, when you think about things like artificial intelligence and machine learning, you know, the concept of teaching, you know, technology to learn, they're basing it off of how we as humans, how our minds learn and how we compact information too, and even to emulate our anatomical systems is a form of biomimicry, right? So there is science that it comes from our bodies and the understanding of our bodies that is informing how we interact with technology and how technology will eventually interact with us. So it's again, it's a very ever-present thing, how easy people are turning to nature for inspiration to all types of things.
I love it. These are all wonderful insights. I'm still gonna be a stickler and say a lot of these, you know, Karen brought us back to this point earlier, these high school, middle school teachers who are with those kids and they have to show up on their screens and computers for 6 hours a day or however long they have to be in school. Do we see any possibilities? Do we see any new technologies or just a transformation in the way that we think about engaging our kids that might be born out of this moment that could serve as an antidote to, you know, to what might just become kind of this screen washing of a lot of our young people, particularly during COVID. But I would argue that it was a trend long before the pandemic and virtual learning, where I'd walk through schools' hallways and see classrooms where kids were spending a lot of their time on their devices. So yeah, I'm curious, do we have any insights into what this sort of technological age is inviting us into in regards to how we can really build biomimicry into the educations for especially some of those older learners?
Well, my kids are still little, so I don't have personally too much experience in that. But you know what I'm, you know, even what I see with them is like, you know, the type of like screen stuff that they even engage in. If we're being mindful even about what content we're giving them, you know, I'd much rather them watch a Wild Kratts episode and or like the Magic School Bus where they're learning about mycelium or they're learning about, you know, and it's like I would, you know, it's also about being mindful about what we're exposing our children to, and again, it's like kind of like this thesis statement that's behind everything, right? Is of us really being present to the fact that, and being really aware and having it at the forefront that nature is our primary teacher. Nature is our primary teacher. You know, we are nature. And so it's like layering all that into it. And even in the new realm of kind of the digital learning, you know, I think everybody just needs to also, educators as well and parents as well, also have to really you know, like why do a PE session in front of a screen? You know, like it's like sometimes it's like there's an overkill that happens. It's like I'm supposed to be watching this, you know, being engaged with this child from this time to this time. The reality of it is kids only need about, you know, a couple of hours, like maybe an hour of focused learning of the kind of the fundamentals of math and math and English, or math and language arts in the little years, and maybe a couple of hours, 2 to 3 hours in the older years. You know, the vast majority of the rest of our education experience for our children should be them exploring their passions and interests, them, you know, relationally having the, you know, teaching them, helping them, supporting them around the like emotional, social, you know, elements, relational parts of themselves, so that they can be, you know, living in community, being able to collaborate on projects, as well as like project-based learning, where they don't have to, they may be engaging with the screen, but they're also writing and drawing and doing other things as well. And so I think it's also about, you know, we kind of always swing from one extreme to another, you know, we kind of went like full tech mode and everything is online. And then I'm hoping that we can kind of now find a balance of figuring out, like, you know, this part doesn't have to be in front of a Zoom call. This part can be on your own, this, you know, and this part could be using other kind of parts of your brain. And so, so I think, yeah, I mean, I think it's about the content that we're bringing and what the underlying kind of messages of that content that they're consuming, and as well as us, you know, getting back to our own like sensibility too. Sometimes we get a little off track, and just really connecting about like, is this really necessary to do in front of a screen? Is there another way to do this learning? You know, like it's even as simple as using natural, like, again, my mind goes to the younger years because I have the littles, but it's like using natural materials to do art, using natural materials to do math, you know, and so it's just having that be such a part of their world that they don't know any better. Like, what's the difference of using plastic pegs versus using pine cones? It's just bringing in that nature element into all parts of the learning and living.
In biomimicry, there's this practice of what we call eyesights, where it's essentially us trying to reconnect with nature through, you know, just going back to like understanding what's going on with our five senses. What are we, if we stand still, what are we hearing, right? What are the sounds of nature in our neighborhood, on our balcony? You know, what are we seeing? What patterns do we see in nature? When we look at a leaf, what shapes do we see? How many different shapes of leaves do we see in, you know, a 1 foot square patch of, you know, of grass, right? How many bugs do we see? You know, what's the feeling underneath our fingertips? What do we smell? And I think, you know, just there's some chat going on about these kind of low tech approaches, and oftentimes with biomimicry, the solutions are very simple. They might not necessarily be easy, or sometimes they might be simple but hard, if that makes sense, or simple but complex. But the approachability is as, you know, as ever present as, you know, these things that we use every day. So what are you seeing? What are you hearing? How many shapes? There's counting right there. You know, what do you hear? What do you smell? Olfactory senses, there's biology to that. So there's all of these different, I think, elements that can supplement the great curriculum that Karen and Suki are talking about.
And not to mention mindfulness. Sorry, Karen, but that's just a mindfulness practice right there.
Exactly.
I'd like to jump in on that low tech piece, because I think, you know, when there was the sudden shelter in place, we all had to rely on low tech ways to do science. I mean, we didn't have our fancy equipment and our STEM labs, and we didn't even have like online ready science materials. So it was kind of back to basics. So go out and observe the phases of the moon, go out and listen to nature and write down what you're hearing and what you're seeing. And I really think of this as like the wow and the wonder approach to biomimicry. So help kids notice and appreciate the awesomeness of nature, and then guide them to that what if question. So I love critters of all kinds, especially little ones. So for example, you can collect some pill bugs. Do you guys all have pill bugs where you live? And have the kids observe them for a while. Wow, pill bugs are so cool. They roll up when you touch them. So then get them to think, what if we designed a robot that could do a job for us that was based on the structures of the pill bug? What job would the pill bot do, and what structures would it need to do its job? So there's a lesson called Pill Bots in one of my books, and I have that on the Padlet if you want to check that out. And then just real quick, I wanted to give a plug for children's literature because that's my jam. And it's a great way for kids to learn about nature and learn from nature. It's a great jumping off point for outdoor investigations. And one of my favorite authors for really young kids is April Pulley-Sayre. And she has these fabulous books like, let's show this. This is her newest one, Being Frog. And this is great to teach empathy. It starts, a frog is a being. It is watching. It is seeing. So think of the frog as a being. And then that can lead you to thinking about its, cool structures and functions. She also has this whole series called Weather Walks. And Suki was mentioning, dressing for the weather. And she's got one called Best in Snow. And I read this to my kids when it snowed this past winter. And I read it first, and then we went out and we were really looking at the snow in a different way after reading that. Emily Morgan has some books for a little bit older readers that I love. She has a whole series called Next Time You See. So it's about different animals and plants and phenomenon. And the idea is that the next time you see it, you'll look at it with new eyes. So like I said, I like critters and I like bugs, and she has one called Next Time You See a Bee, and I love it. I think that it's really great to springboard into biomimicry. So for example, you can start thinking about the amazing structures of a bee and then start thinking, what if? So, you might say, did you know that it's physically impossible for bumblebees to fly? And yet they do, and they're like super efficient and maneuverable. So one really cool thing is that they have their little wings can kind of zip and unzip for flight and landing. So what if airplanes could do that? So it's a great springboard. And then just two more real quick. I could talk about books all day. So my new book is Nature Hidden First, and you can check it out on the Padlet. And I'm excited about it because it's the first biomimicry book that I've seen for really young readers. And then Jennifer Swanson just came out with Beastly Bionics, which is for older readers. So really the first step to a biomimicry practice is having that sense of wonder about nature, and books like these can be really helpful.
Wow, I feel so lucky to be here. I'm learning so much from all of you, and it's just got me thinking that, our bodies, our senses are such incredible technology, and education is the process of taking in signals and responding to them and operating in those feedback loops. That's what shapes our brain, right? Literally our neurons, that's what causes them to fire. And that we are this, we don't have to always be connected to the screen. I was just imagining, if there was a curriculum that we were designing that was taking the standards and objectives and then sending our young people out safely, dressed for the weather and dressed for COVID-19, out into their communities on walks, on their own, or maybe in very small groups. Are these kinds of things possible in some of our communities? Can we find ways to do that? I think now is the time to get creative. You guys are inspiring me to think in that direction. I know that here in Hawaii, we are, as soon as we take our kids out into their watershed to explore what we call from Mauka, the mountains, to Makai, to the ocean, they begin to see all kinds of new teachers, not just in nature, but in a lot of cool new community partners or businesses or nonprofit organizations that are in our communities that they never knew about. And their horizons are really expanded, and they meet a lot more adults, like Suki was talking about, who speak with a deep reverence for nature and understand the cultural significance of our relationship to the land and to the water. And so I think, wow, there's really, how can we use our apps and our online ability to communicate in a networked way to diversify the experiences, the unique experiences that our young people are having in their own communities, really capturing that genius of place. I know that's a goal of mine to continue working on that here. A lot of people have questions about how to do that in the constraints of an education system. And I really think that now is a moment to be asking and answering that question, developing answers to that question. We need professional development and curriculum being developed with teachers and by teachers in schools for their local genius of places. And we need people in leadership positions of leadership who are willing to listen to biology, nature at the design table and leadership table around making those decisions. So how do we get there? That's going to be sort of a big question, maybe a topic for another fireside chat, but this has been a really good start. We have a few minutes left, and I have so many more questions that I'd love to ask you guys. But I'll start with Billy, and maybe are there just any examples of content that exist out there that you're already aware of? I know you actually do create some content through the shows and other media. So can you share what's some content out there for people who are educators or homeschooling parents for introducing biology and biomimicry?
Well, I think the main one that I definitely want to make sure to mention is the Biomimicry Youth Design Challenge, which is this amazing opportunity to get kids engaged in creating solutions that are informed and inspired by natural systems and the strategies of nature. As a supplement to that, I did want to also recommend a great book called The Lost Art of Reading Nature's Signs. Karen, you talked about bees, and one of the things that I love in this book was it was talking about how in certain instances you can predict the weather by seeing whether or not bees are hovering around their hives or not. You can tell whether storms are coming. So there's all of these great facts in here. I'll just hold it up again. That support that, and there's so many great Pinterest boards and Instagram posts about biomimicry, but definitely the Biomimicry Youth Design Challenge. There's some training courses that I know the Institute and Biomimicry 3.8 offers, and I did want to mention just Astrobiofuturism again, which is really about exploring the biological needs that people exploring space exploration will have, and how those same innovations can be applied to our near future conditions of Earth in the context of climate change. And space exploration and biomimicry, there's a natural fit there. So when you're looking for things to capture the imagination of your students, I just wanted to also mention my work with that as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Billy. Oh, I see Lex chiming back in. That might mean that I'm officially out of time, but it was really a pleasure talking with all of you. I know there's a lot more. Maybe we can take it offline and record it and share it, but this was really fantastic. Thank you all.
Yes, this is definitely just the beginning of this conversation. I want to give a big dose of gratitude from the Institute and from everyone in this chat who has clearly enjoyed this conversation. Thank you, our amazing panel. It's conversations like these that really give me hope for the next generation. I wish I had been introduced to nature like this from such an early age. Biomimicry is really all about seeing through that new lens, and this really is just the beginning of the conversation. I would like to take a moment to correct my previous statement about Jacob, who is alive, thankfully. I recommend you all read his story. I continue to educate myself and humbly learn from my mistakes. At the Biomimicry Institute, we're rolling out new resources this fall for youth education, so stay tuned for more ways to engage in biomimicry learning beyond the Youth Design Challenge. And for those wanting some initial resources and activities to get started, I'm going to pop a link down here in the chat. It was published this morning on Asking Nature, so that's a good place to start. But if you're on our newsletter list, next week you'll also receive more ways to bring nature into the classroom or living room. And we'll share all the panelists' social handles and resources with the community so everyone can continue following their work. And if you have resources to share, please send them our way to hello@biomimicry.org. We all know these are scary times. Like, let's get real. It's scary, but it's also, you know, in this great reset, we can get clear about our priorities and put the children and their future first. As always, if you feel inspired to help us on this journey in offering biomimicry education to more youth across the country, please visit biomimicry.org. And a big special thank you for being with us today, everyone. And thank you, Billy, Suki, Daniel, and Karen. Your leadership voices is everything we needed to hear today. Thanks, everyone. Aloha.